Yes, as we celebrate the successful delegitimization of the 1999 Constitution, those who did not listen when we told them to suspend the talk of further national elections under this Constitution, they've gone to their election, the presidential election of February 25, 2023. Is inconclusive, and so the election has collapsed on their head. It doesn't matter what the courts do now. What happened on February 25, 2023 cannot become basis of 4 years executive power under the 1999 Constitution. You can take that to the bank, no matter what the courts do. The question of 25% that was not met by the candidate they declared first as number one, and the candidate number two on one side. The fact that INEC abandoned the law on the day of election, in fact, renders the outcome untenable on its own. Untenable on its own. What do I mean? I saw some of my colleagues, the lawyers, very senior lawyers, saying that the National Assembly and the amendment they made that gave INEC some kind of, what do they call it, the mandate to decide the modalities for transmission, collation, result of election. Absolute discretion, language used. Now, follow the logic so you can understand what went wrong with the election. The Electoral Act amendment took place on a certain date in 2022. It was in that amendment that INEC was given the mandate. INEC was given absolute discretion to determine the mode of transmission, transfer, collation of results. After that date, INEC, in exercise of that discretion, absolute discretion to determine mode and modalities, issued its guidelines. In those guidelines, it stipulated what will happen on election day, that votes will be cast and counted and entered into the result sheet from EC whatever, and that as it is entered in the presence of the party representatives, agents, the beavers machine by which the accreditation is done is also used to now capture that one sheet of paper, and the party agents will of course use their phones to capture, so everybody has the same image. But the one from that beavers machine, in the presence of those party agents, is transmitted to the server. And there's the IREV, that's a IREV, that is supposed to be connected live to that, such that as the results are coming in, we have 176,000 polling units across the country. And so from every one polling unit, this is supposed to be happening. And so people who wanted to know the outcome of the elections in Nigeria only needed to, tune to open up their system to the IREV to see results coming in real time. And so there's no human interference. That was the purpose of the law. The purpose of that electoral amendment, amendment of the Electoral Act, is to remove all human interferences. From the point the vote is cast, counted, transmitted, there will be nobody that is sitting to juggle the figures. And so, the fact that INEC chose to depart from that on that day, let me explain the implication, the legal implications, which is why I say, which is why our position is that the outcome of that exercise of February 25, 2023 is untenable at law. When a statute mandates an act or action, an agency of government is mandated to do something. INEC mandated to conduct election by law. The law is that if there be regulations, if there be guidelines, if there be modalities issued by that agency of government pursuant to that statutory mandate, in this case, INEC mandated to conduct election with all the powers granted, now issuing guidelines for how it will be done. Those guidelines, those regulations, those modalities become automatically a part of that act, such that, an integral part of that act, such that the agency is not at liberty to, is no longer at liberty. The agency becomes functus officio of that discretion or power granted it to determine modalities. You can add or subtract from what you put out, because you are talking to third parties who have to prepare themselves. Like the parties have to prepare their agents, have to prepare how they can function well within that. So that is the law. Anybody who tells you any other thing is illiterate, is being dishonest. Either both or one. INEC exercised the absolute discretion it was granted by that electoral law amendment by issuing the guidelines it issued, and became functus officio from that point on the question of what will be the modalities, what will be the what will happen on election day. And so when on election day INEC then departed from that guideline, what it means at law is that INEC departed from the law. So that election was conducted unlawfully. The product from that election is untenable at law. The question of 25% stands on its own. But the question of INEC, except there is something like, we know there is a server, there is a backup server, there were the evidence that the Court of Appeal rejected. That's the only room left for them to if there be evidence that those things that INEC tried to suppress, all the time it yanked off, for the 72 hours it yanked off the server. If there is a record of what was transmitted that independent technology experts can verify, that is the only thing you can fall back to give life to what happened on February 25, because that is what will bring it back within the law. But if it is what the Court of Appeal did in saying that they will not take this evidence and that evidence relating to what was done in fulfillment of the law, the Court of Appeal rejected from what we saw, because we watched the judgment they delivered the whole day live. In rejecting those things that could have filled that gap of INEC abandoning the law on the election day. Those were the things that Court of Appeal rejected, and then landed on the outcome we saw, upholding the charade of February 25, 2023 as an election that has produced president. Let us be clear on this. The earlier we come back from our dreamland and work with the truth on this matter and work with the law, even with the Constitution as disputed as it is, the better. That 25% requirement is going nowhere. It doesn't matter how the Court of Appeal said it. That question of departure from guideline, electronic transmission, is going nowhere. They both vitiate the outcome that has been declared. The remedy, the first one has no remedy. The one of 25% has no remedy for candidate 1 and 2. The one of departure from guideline has a window of remedy if there is a server that has everything that transpired, so that you can fall back on that server to determine the actual figures devoid of human interference. But if it is all these mutilated papers that were uploaded that INEC will rely upon to coronate the one they've coronated, we run a risk. INEC defied the Constitution by trying to waive that 25% and pointing people to court. We have now seen the reason for that arrogance of go to court. Mary Odili gave all of you out. Whether she did it deliberately or she did it in miscalculation, Mary Odili gave all of you out for what you plan to do. Even the Supreme Court cannot escape the consequences of what Mary Odili did. Just like Adams Oshomole, as chairman of APC, said to everybody, if your iniquities are red as crimson, come unto APC. Your sins will be, all things will pass away for you. So if you have corruption hanging on your neck, don't worry, just come. We'll put it aside for you. Mary Odili gave away the judiciary for what it intended to do, what it had planned to do with the executive, with whoever was involved in organizing that election. So the Supreme Court is already, that question mark is already on the head of the Supreme Court, that they are determined to do the evil they are doing, and people were invited not to bring down the roof. The roof of the House of Lugard will go down. It's up to us to manage the dismantling, because that house is standing on a foundation of fraud. The mischief of 1914 is now framed in the fraud of 1999. The earlier we come to that realization and to the conclusion that we can therefore not cure it by election in the manner we have, particularly in the manner we have seen, the better. Candidate Tinubu who want to remain president, no quarrel with him. Candidate Atiku may have been running all around Chicago to become, since they say it's number 2, to become president. That's entirely his business. Candidate Peter Obi, who actually won the election, may be hoping, well, Supreme Court should be able to sort out certain things and give. But Ninas is standing on the opposite side of the road. These three subscribe to this constitution of a fraud, this constitution of a forgery, this constitution of death. And so we say, looking at what happened on that day, February 25, against the backdrop of the union dispute we declared December 16, 2020, rejecting that constitution as basis of further national elections, we come into that fray because there's a fray, there's a fight now among these three subscribers to evil. What Ninas will say to the situation is, let us leave this altercation alone. The election has gone bad. We are now in that constitutional logjam. We are in that constitutional logjam. look at this imagery. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the domino 2. What Nina's set in motion was to demonstrate our rejection of the union of debt and the constitution of fraud by the rejection of election. So you see the pillar of election, you see the pillar of constitution, you see the pillar of union. But you also see the owners of the union rejecting the election as a demonstration of their rejection of that bad constitutional arrangement. And so that constitutional logjam that will bring us to the inevitable transitioning arrangement, that is, we must stop like South Africa stopped in 1990. The construction is that constitutional force majeure was stop work. The way you see stop work on construction site, that was what we issued. But those who have built their life around fraud and brigandage carried on. Here we are. So Ninas is happy to announce that that constitutional logjam has now been achieved. Whether we go very quickly to transition to sort out the matter, or we wait in obduracy for the union to collapse on our head, because that's what's going to happen. If anybody is stupid enough to think that this constitution will remain basis of union in the kind of thing that issues from it upon everybody, that stupidity will cost more blood. That stupidity will cost more misery. The logjam is here. Let's go to this transition. If we refuse, the default is end of union. That constitution is gone. Back to where the NAS was going with this constitutional force majeure. The meaning of all of what you've heard is that the delegitimization is complete. We are now in the midst of the decommissioning of that constitution, and from there we get into the dismantling. No matter what the courts do, no matter what the parties are doing, or the candidates and everybody else, we are on the way to the reconstruction that will begin with renegotiation of the union that has collapsed.